Good morning and welcome to The Point. It is Tuesday, June 29th, 2021. Thank you to those of you joining us on the GBN Grenada Broadcasting Network's Facebook page, the Grenada Broadcasting Network's YouTube channel, the website www.gbn.gd, GBN TV channel 7, 11 and 20. Good morning to the listeners of Classic 105.5, 105.9 and all the folks joining us on Party Grenada and Go to FET Facebook pages. Always a pleasure to have you. Thank you for tuning in to The Point. This morning, my virtual guest is the Deputy Public Relations Officer Deputy Public Relations Officer of the National Democratic Congress, Mr. Ron Redhead. Good morning, Mr. Redhead. How you do?
Good morning, Blossom. I am doing okay. You're giving me a title there, man.
You understand? And I'm giggling because I know that is one of the questions I want to ask you this morning, like I take it in front. Happy to have you. Always a pleasure.
Yes.
So let's see. We have a lot of things to talk about this morning. I'm wondering where to start, boy. Let's start with, you know what? Let's start with the 4%. Let's start with 4%. I know this is a conversation that has been going on in January. A lot of people are, they're tired of hearing about it, but it's an ongoing situation. And following the Prime Minister's announcement on Friday that the 4% salary increase, they will see it reflected in public officers will see it reflected as of the end of August 2021. What do you think about this news? Is it timely? Is it what do you think? Let me put it that way. What do you think about the Prime Minister's announcement?
Well, first off, we in the NDC want to congratulate that move because you see, and I wouldn't say it's timely. It's way past the original deadline. However, right now, there were no choices. And I think injecting that level of increase to public officers right now will do well for the economy. I mean, it's next to nothing when you put it in the grand scheme of things. But it's an important injection nonetheless, and it was something that was already negotiated for. And it's good to make good on the promise. Not promise, but on the negotiations that concluded with the public servants. So for me, personally, I think it's okay. It was necessary. And I really couldn't see no reason why it could not have been paid. And that story about the drop in revenue and so on, because government did not cut any taxes. So what would have happened because of the impact of the lockdown? What you had was just a reduction in revenue collections, but the revenues would have returned once things reopened. So it's something good. Something good, important.
In watching the newscast last night, I was on the Facebook page because sometimes I like to see some of the comments from members of the public and hear how they're thinking. And one of the comments that stood out to me was somebody said, she said the Prime Minister's comments in relation to paying the 4% seemed like he was still blaming the public officers and teachers for asking for their money. Do you get that impression?
I get that impression, and this is why I'm saying I still don't buy into the excuses and all the stories that were given about the revenues and all these other things, because we have strong evidence to suggest that this was really not the case. And as I said, government didn't cut any taxes. Therefore, there would have not been any major fallout once things reopened and resumed. So paying that which was negotiated upon before COVID would have been just almost a run of the mill. Shouldn't really had to reach to that level. So for me, in my honest opinion, I think that government is seizing the moment. Of course, you know what may be coming up maybe next year and when it's constitutionally due. So they want to ensure that they start off on a good foot, because in 2022, we will have fresh negotiations for public officers again. And that outstanding issue, had it not been resolved, would have been a dark cloud over the head of the upcoming negotiations. And definitely it would have helped to create, as the PRO said for Public Workers Union, Sister Daisy Hazard, the atmosphere of this kind of aggression with the public servants and government. What you need is stability. And it was good to make that a reality. And it's welcoming news. So NDC welcomes that news 100%.
All right. Another something of interest I know you have as well in relation to the COVID-19 vaccines. And a lot of people have interest in the vaccines that will be coming from Cuba. Just Last week, I read a story of Cuba starting to use one of the vaccines that they have approved. It hasn't gotten WHO approval as yet, but they're using it among their nationals. Is this a direction that you're hoping would speed up the
Yes,
coming on board of Cuba's vaccines?
Yes, I am hoping so. I'm very, very excited and looking forward to how the Cuban vaccine would roll out. And this has nothing to do primarily with ideology. You know, my admiration for Cuba and all these other things goes deeper than just ideology. And I'm not a communist. I'm not believing in that kind of model. I think that served its time and times are different. But Cuba's fight against third world exploitation, Cuba's fight against third world development is something that will live on forever. And the advancements in health and things of that nature is something definitely that we in the Caribbean and Latin American community must emulate. Our region must seek to promote Cuba to its rightful place, in my view. And there is no better opportunity at this moment with the COVID-19, a novel virus coming on stream, and Cuba, who has been under the intense pressure of a blockade, was able to develop a vaccine which ranks high among some of the other vaccines that were produced by millionaires and other rich countries. So Cuba is doing well in this regard, and I am looking forward. What I would hasten to say is that the Ministry of Health, hopefully, and the government in general will seek to reach out as we begin to don't only just look at the COVAX facility, but if the Cuban vaccine gets approval from the WHO, seek to introduce it here as soon as possible. Of course, pending all the necessary trials and all these other things, because we don't want any specific issue to occur new and apart from the concerns people already have with the AstraZeneca and others. So I would like for them to hasten that, or at least make a pronouncement on it, because I think it's exciting news for the region, and it augurs well for the future of medicine in the Caribbean and Latin American community.
Generally, what do you think about the vaccine program rollout in Grenada, around the Caribbean, the rest of the world? How it has been going, especially with instances of shortage or delays in shipments because, of course, of what's going on in India. What are your thoughts on the vaccine rollout?
Yeah, well, it's going to have challenges, and this is expected. So I don't think people must, you can't really fault governments. And I want to be clear, NDC is not blaming the NNP government in any way that, let's say, we can't get enough vaccines and that sort of thing. What we do recognize is that the present situation in Grenada, where people are losing jobs as a result of not being vaccinated, is something that must not continue. And it requires some level of intervention from the state to help put a more balanced approach to the thing. This is not a case where we are saying, well, don't take the vaccine because vaccines are not good. We are not anti-vaxxers. What we do recognize is the importance and value of vaccinations, but you must also do it in a responsible way. So what we are calling on the state to do is announce bipartisan grouping, trade unions, private sector, the Ministry of Health, other stakeholders, to organize vaccination rollout, and do not leave it only for the Ministry of Health and make it into a political thing. You know, it shouldn't be like that. We, as the politicians, should not have to be telling people to come out and do something for their health. Right? I think that must be strictly up to the professionals. But in rolling out a vaccination program, you need stakeholders. So in my view, what the government ought to do is to form a grouping of all these people that I have just named, and to organize them in such a way that you don't have unions fighting against business places and so on, but everybody has a common understanding of how we are going to work, and we are not going to force workers to go home, because COVID-19 has been very difficult already in the past number of months. And to try to pressure individuals into submission of taking the vaccination is not a likely route that I believe we should go. So that's the only issue we see really with the vaccination rollout. There are other issues, but it's not directly related to government. And we must be balanced and honest about it. So because Grenada is not producing vaccines, sorry, and you can't fault when there may not be sufficient or you're getting it late, etc. So that issue is not something that we are looking to score any mileage on.
Let's say the NDC, let's say next election is next week, please Lord, NDC wins the election. In the midst of the vaccination rollout and the NDC is elected into government, what would be your next step in the rollout program to ensure that it continues, improves, gets better, progresses, however you want to put it?
Yes, well, definitely to enhance it and ensure that it continues, but do it in a responsible manner. As I said earlier, we're going to form a grouping. Should we form the government, let's say, as you have alluded to, next week? We are going to form a group which will be primarily responsible for discussing vaccination rollout. And I'm talking vaccination rollout in, let's say, the education sector, the health sector, and the different sectors of the economy to ensure that workers are going to get vaccinations, not just on their own timing, but in conjunction or discussions, dialogue, with a much more tempered environment that people can focus now on doing their jobs. They are not feeling pressured. And we are not going to fault businesses who are not vaccinated. Because mind you, the responsibility of the state to provide some level of protection at the borders must not be overlooked as if, well, what is happening is that you can't stop people from coming in or you can't do anything at the borders, so the business places must take responsibility to vaccinate all their workers. We're not going to pressure people in that manner. So our program will be, of course, taking what works presently and also enhancing the areas that we see need enhancing. So it's not going to be a total overhauling and so on. As I said in previous interviews, I think generally the government of Grenada, the public servants, and all the other stakeholders responsible for the management of COVID must be commended. On the economic side, we have differences. But in terms of ensuring that we did not spiral into a situation as Trinidad and Tobago, for example, and I know they are dealing with it, they are really fighting, but ensuring that we did not come like that, that must be commended. And we will continue the good out of that. But there are areas still to be enhanced.
Another area I know you are passionate about is in relation to the re-establishment, reconstruction, coming back on board of the Carlton Home. Yes. The Grenada Cooperative Bank has what I call led a campaign to raise much needed funds to see that the building is refurbished or get a new location for the Carlton Home. But so far we have not been able to re-establish or reopen such a facility. What do you think should be the next step in that vein?
Well, first off, let me just commend the private sector representative, that is Grenada Co-op Bank, as you have mentioned, for that leadership on this matter, because I think it's necessary. I believe that the next step required now is for government to make good on its promise. So the workers at the Ministry of Finance, Brother Mike Sylvester and team, should really consider trying to make good on the original promise from the budget presentation last year of giving towards such an initiative. I welcomed the pronouncement because I thought it was very important. Today in Grenada, if you just go in St. George's, you see a lot of young men on the streets. They are homeless, they are begging, that sort of thing. And it's not really because that they are not of sound mind, but many of them have fallen victim to drug and substance abuse. Now, the Carlton Home's function, which is to rehabilitate, is very important and critical in this type of situation. And I really believe that something has to be done, both at the level of the state and the private sector. The private sector is leading it, but I think now the partnership from the state is required. We must put the money where our mouth is, so to speak. And we must try to make good on that original promise. So it will be a welcoming news, I believe. And I know I can speak for myself and also the social development spokesmen and women in NDC will welcome such an initiative and will walk along, because you will require technical people to ensure that you are doing rehabilitation in the right way and this does not turn into a political placement and this person here and so on, but you get the professionals to help solve this problem.
In the meantime, how can we help our young men, even not young men alone, a matter of fact, our young men and women deal with substance abuse, whether it be alcohol or illegal drugs or whatever their vice may be? How can we help our young men and women get through this period until, a permanent establishment comes on board or comes back?
Yes, well, you would require a lot of discussions with psychologists and these kind of people to get the real professional assessment. However, family will be critical during these periods. And in my view, the family will have to play the most important role, which is, for example, in terms of giving help to some of them and identifying who family members are, who should we contact to get things to people, etc. Because this has been a personal difficulty. This has been an experience I have had, but it has been a personal difficulty to get the family members of some of the young men that are on the streets. I went to school with some of them, and it's very heartbreaking. I can't post their photographs or their names on social media. I wouldn't do that to them. But it's very heartbreaking. And sometimes getting in contact with family members is difficult. So I would say that the family, the churches, they will have a role to play. The community where they come from will have a role to play to ensure that they either pass on information or can be a conduit between people who want to give assistance and the person, family members. So I really think that in the meantime, without saying any specific recommendation, because I am not a professional, but I believe that the family members of the individuals will have to play a key role in trying to get help for them.
And before we go to the break, I need to ask, let's put it as NDC's business. I always want to know if there's an update in relation to convention, what would be a much looked at election of a political leader. What's the latest with the NDC?
Right. Well, NDC continues its work, its political work. We are going to be going to Windsor Forest on Wednesday, St. David, and the public engagement, the walkabouts, the engagement with voters and people generally, Grenadians generally, both home and abroad, continues. As it relates to convention, the date will be announced by the General Secretary, or the Office of General Secretary at least, in the coming weeks and months. So you can look forward to a specified date when we will hold our convention. Again, this is something we want to manage properly. As you know, there are certain vices and perceptions out there about the NDC. So the need to ensure that we are stable and going into our convention properly is important. You're going to hear all kind of propaganda out about the street and so on, but we're not going to be too focused on that for now. And the general mood of the party is that we want to see things change, and it starts with the man in the mirror. So we are going to be doing a lot of reflecting and introspection before going into that convention. And hopefully the delegates, through their democratic right, will make the best choices as they see it fit.
Mr. Alexander, trying to remember his full name, Mr. Alexander has, I don't think there's a man name, Philip. Telesford, that's it. Philip Telesford. He has signaled his intention to vie for the political leader position. I understand Mr. Adrian Persuader Thomas says he will not be contesting that position. Do you know of anyone else who would be throwing their hat into the ring? Is Ron Redhead among them?
No, Ron Redhead is not among them, and there's a process to follow. There is a process to follow in terms of vying for the position of leader for the National Democratic Congress. And I would personally encourage everybody to follow the process. But people have the right to make that pronouncement. One thing with the organization is that it is democratic and people are not going to be penalized to any extreme extent for wanting to vie for a position. I don't see any issues with that. So I encourage it. But again, we must remember that it must be managed and it shouldn't turn into a brawl. This one versus that one, that kind of thing. But I look forward to what decisions will be made. And I couldn't really give any specific names, but there are other individuals interested. Some new, some old. I don't want to use that word, but you know what I mean. So I'm looking forward to see what decision will be ultimately made. Exciting times ahead.
There's always a call for younger leadership in political parties, not just the NDC. So even if you can't name names, can you tell us if there are young people among them, or are they just veteran potentials? We'll call them veterans, not old.
Well, that might be, I don't want to get in any trouble for that, but what I would say is that I believe that change is coming, and once the right procedures are followed, young veterans, anybody who meet the criteria and is right for the times, I believe, should offer themselves for the position of leader of the NDC. So I wouldn't really get into age and so on in terms of trying to pinpoint where they are from. But what I would say is that it is something that the party is looking deep into. We are going to be driven by data in terms of making a final decision. But all are welcomed, and we continue in that, like young, veteran, everybody.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Let's take a break, and then we're going to come back and continue the discussion, speaking with the Deputy Public Relations Officer of the National Democratic Congress, Ron Redhead. To the point, we'll be right back.
Montreal, it's time to line virtually one more time. Gemma Rayburn Baines here for Spice Island Cultural Festival, a celebration of Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique. This summer's festival is a celebration of life with food, fashion, music, and culture. Join us online Saturday, July 10th, 3 p.m. on Facebook and YouTube at Spice Island Cultural Festival. Info, spiceislandculturalday.com.
Do you hear what I hear? Listen to the ocean, and you will hear a cry for help. The ocean is hurting, and we are the source of the hurt. But we can stop and start to heal our ocean by preventing pollution from getting into our waterways. It can start with you. Join an active organization, or better yet, make a personal commitment. Commit not for just one day in the year, but for the rest of your life. Let's dispose of our plastic and other waste responsibly, and let's start building resilience. Let the healing begin.
This message is brought to you by the OECS Commission with funding from the Government of Norway. Remlit, tackling ocean pollution from tooth to sooth.
Hey folks, you're invited to tune in to Grenada Music to the World program, hosted by Eugene Gittens on Saturday mornings from 10 a.m. to 12 noon on Classic Radio 105.5, 105.9, Hot FM 98.5, 98.7, GBN TV, and all their social media platforms. The only totally local music program in Grenada, representing all genres of music. So it's Green's Music to the World on Saturday mornings from 10 a.m. to 12 noon on GBN with the music icon himself, Mr. Eugene Gittens. See you then.
Welcome back to The Point, speaking with Deputy Public Relations Officer of the NDC, Ron Redhead. It's now time for us to facilitate questions, comments, concerns from members of the public. The landline number 435-2041. That's also the WhatsApp number. Please, only written messages on WhatsApp, and you can continue to post your comments, questions, queries, concerns on Facebook and YouTube. Let us go to the first caller of the program. Good morning, caller. Good morning, caller. Hello? Good morning. All right, seem to have lost that one, so let's go to YouTube. Somebody on YouTube is asking, what would an NDC government in Grenada mean for the people of Cuba? Would the NDC foster a closer relationship with Cuba in trade?
Good question. Definitely, it is something that we are going to be looking at, and not just Cuba, but to ensure that Grenada is trading with other countries. Now, I must say, at the level of agriculture, while it is seen almost one-dimensional, backyard gardening type of agriculture, that's the most prevalent style. But we can broaden the thing towards that level in terms of production, the tertiary level. And we can find means and ways. You see, I couldn't really speak to specifics because things can change. Information may not be available that would be available if we are in government. But the intention, the vision, and the focus must be how do we enhance our possibilities. And I speak from not just a national standpoint, but a regional standpoint. As I said earlier, Cuba's fight against exploitation of the third world is something very commendable, and it has nothing to do with ideology, but it is purely on the basis of what Cuba has stood for, barring some of the other issues, because you know the whole fight between the communists and the Soviets and Cuba versus America. We're not getting into that, barring that. But I think there are some things generally that Cuba have stood for the region, and they must be rewarded for it. The longest rope has its end, and I want to take this opportunity, of course, on behalf of the National Democratic Congress and many Grenadians at large, to call for the removal of the blockade on Cuba. This is the 21st century. This is not 1960s where you had communism as a talking point for American politicians. We need to open up economies. In terms of the dependence of the region, we can remove that dependence on other countries and focus to build our alliances with Cuba in a more direct way and get benefits from that, not just on the political side, but the health side, as we have mentioned earlier. So I think there are direct benefits to be derived, and we need to harness that potential rather than suppress it, because I think if it is harnessed well and channeled the right way, there will be no discussion about communism and which of the two models is better, communism versus capitalism. Everybody will be developing and moving regions and countries forward.
Hold on, landline? No. So somebody on Facebook is inquiring, what are the NDC's plans for the CBI? Would they scrap it or no?
CBI is something that we must look at presently because how the economies are structured in the Caribbean. You can't run from it. So those countries who have implemented CBI programs are becoming more and more dependent upon it. And that's the so-called danger. So you would have to work with it, but enhance it. So for example, the majority of investment that occurs with CBI currently is hotels. What we would do in the NDC is look to broaden its use, which you don't only want hotel, but you're going to look at educational facilities, health facilities, investments in those areas, and seek to broaden the scope of what the CBI currently promotes. So it wouldn't just be about hotels. But this is a discussion that we have had, I think, as early and still as far back as former political leader Franca Bernardine. We have held such discussions in the past, and we will continue it and enhance as we go along. So our plans for CBI is to broaden its scope, and scrapping may be something that might be a technical thing. So we will not make a pronouncement on that, but what we will seek to do is broaden the scope of what CBI currently looks at.
All right, let's go to a caller. Good morning, caller.
Hi, good morning, Ron. I just have to commend you, man. Grenada have hope. Grenada have hope. When you see a young man like that who can explain properly with that passion to go forward, it tells me that we are on the right track. I just want to encourage him to keep focused, encourage him to keep praying and trusting God. Because oftentimes the politicians, they don't focus on the God factor. We oftentimes think just about winning votes and winning people emotionally, and we think about just our party. But what I'm seeing here is a young man that think about country. I'm seeing a young man that thinking about the future. He's composed. You can see he's well-rounded. And I'm looking at him. I'm keeping my eyes on him. There is hope. There is hope, Grenada. My brother, keep up the good work. Keep on praying. Keep on being humble. God bless you.
Thank you very much, caller.
Thanks.
All right, Facebook. The same person that asked about the CBI, they are asking what are the NDC's plans to deal with the breakwater project in St. Patrick?
Right. Joseph Andal, that's the caretaker for St. Patrick West, will be in the best position to respond to such a question. However, what I can say to generalize the response or the answer is to say that we do not believe in the degradation of the environment over development. In other words, the two can work, but you must do it in a responsible manner. We have been looking at the way in which, or the manner in which that specific project was conducted. And in terms of the question of an EPA, all these other things, those questions were raised, but they were never really answered by the powers that be. So first off, if we are elected in the morning, we are going to seek to get information in that regard and to understand the information. And when I say seek, I don't mean the physical government itself, but the necessary staff and professionals required to do so, and look into an alternative or trying to rectify any problems that this specific breakwater project has caused. I thought that it was a bit rushed, and it was more just to bribe some businessmen for votes, as opposed to looking at the long-term development. And these things are very risky, especially when you're considering climate change, when you're considering the environment, and it must be done in the right manner. So you have to be responsible when conducting such projects.
Somebody on YouTube says the NDC needs to prove to people in the country to trust them. If the NDC doesn't prove everything to the people in the country, people would not trust them. Do you think trust is a problem for the NDC?
That's a fair comment, and I would not want to only attribute that question of trust only to the NDC, but I think politicians in general. COVID-19, in an extent, has exposed the sheep from the goat, so to speak, and people are now more very critical of politicians and trying to understand their intentions. So that whole question of trust will be a major factor going forward, from the low levels in the constituency in terms of who represents various communities and constituencies, to as high up as the Prime Minister. I think that is something that everybody will be considering as they go forward, the question of trust. And NDC's responsibility will have to be to prove that trust and to regain that confidence in the general public. As I said earlier on, there are perceptions out there, but we are working tirelessly to try and rectify some of those kinks and try and work out ways in which we can continue to build and bolster confidence in the public on behalf of the party's image and our legacy as well.
All right, let me see. Caller. Let me see if there's a question on WhatsApp in the meantime. Right, let me go to WhatsApp. Somebody on WhatsApp says, Mr. Redhead, do you think the people of Grenada have forgiven the NDC for the infighting that went on in the last formed NDC government? Yes.
I was not wrong for that, but if I must say, it is something that comes up, and we have to be honest about it. I don't expect Grenadians to forget it, but by and large, today, that has ceased to be a problem. There are instances where the public may get perceptions here and there from, disagreements between individuals, but that is a normal part of political organizations. I think the difference today is that there is greater access to social media. So, for example, if Ron Redhead and Glenn Noel may not see eye to eye on something and may have said something in a chat, that could be forwarded to another group, and the message spread and people start to come under the conclusion that Ron Redhead and Glenn Noel have issues, but that may be very far from the truth. And the truth is, we as political organizations have a responsibility to ensure that it does not deteriorate into that kind of thing. So we have learned our lesson over the number of years. And what I could say with a great deal of certainty, today, the approach is much less arrogant. The approach is much less, with this type of tension, and it's more cordial. We do have disagreements still. That is the nature of life. Everybody is not going to share the same position. However, we have a common objective, which is the development of Grenada. And once we live by that code, we believe that we are going to be all right. So getting there and proving it by way of action is different to words, but I can say with greater certainty that NDC has ceased to have these little issues and so on here and there that could threaten the stability of the organization. We are a bit more stable now, still a work in progress, but we are a bit more stable now. Thank God.
Amen. Good morning, caller.
Buenos dias, señora.
Buenos dias.
Good morning, Mr. Redhead. Whenever I hear your voice, I have to call. Because you're one of the persons that I'm listening to in these days and praying for you. You are my prayer list now. So I trust that you would seek God yourself, have a more intimate and deeper relationship with Him so He could guide you and your party. Because in these last days, there's a lot of forces that influence politics. And if we do not have God in us to balance things off, Satan could topple everything because he's vicious, and that's what he's doing. So I would advise that the party as a people get together sometimes and seek the face of God for guidance and for direction, because there are forces that you may have to contend with up there. People with the big tech and the big dollars, they feel they could buy parties or they could buy governments or they could buy nations. So they come with a talk and all thing, and then they influence. So without God, you can fall prey to these things. Secondly, you talk about the CBI. I hope that your party will be looking at what are the advantages and disadvantages of that program. Because one, this party could bring in all kind of people that could enhance their voting abilities to get more people to vote for them. And then also you could bring in people that can, spoil the nation. So we have to be very careful with the kind of people we attract. I remember some time ago there was some people from overseas here who was making summer juices. Summer. That just vanished. I used to buy the soursop and other drinks, but it just vanished. We don't know what happened to that. Maybe they didn't have sufficient money to bribe, so they disintegrate. I don't know. So anyhow, God bless you, and pray that you'll continue to seek God in your advancement for this country. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sister Jeremiah. I appreciate that. And NDC will certainly make good on your recommendations. As it relates to CBI and the advantages and disadvantages, again, very, very relevant question. I didn't speak about it earlier, but I think it is relevant because it will help guide whether or not we should look at a different approach to investment in our region and nationally from foreign investors, or keep the CBI program. So I think going forward, all these discussions, all these information will be important in terms of decision making as to the fate of CBI programs. And if the good outweighs the bad and can be managed properly, we must get it to that level. And as I have said earlier on, we have had, as a party, the NDC, discussions on broadening the scope of what CBI programs invest in, rather than just hotels.
A WhatsApp question: what is the NDC doing to address the issue of people in various or key ministerial positions who are qualified for the position they are currently, who are not? What is the NDC doing to address the issue of people in various or key ministerial positions who are not qualified for the position they are currently holding?
Yeah, that's an issue, because on one hand, you have a situation where it might be square pegs in round holes, and then you have another situation where some public officers are being underutilized, maybe because of their perceived political affiliation or some other issue. Presently, if I had my way, I would outlaw that kind of interference in the public service and let the public service run as a professional institution rather than handpicking and massaging things. If John Smith is the most qualified to implement a program and has the qualifications, has the experience, among other things, which would be a plus, John Smith must be employed within that position to help advance the work of Grenada and not the new National Party or the National Democratic Congress. What should really happen in this regard, because Grenada has a very large public service, is that we must remove the political interference. I think if the professionals run the thing to the best way, we will get the best result. What you would need is a human resource management plan to ensure that you do not have square pegs in round holes, but you have the most qualified individual so that you can improve your efficiency and productivity of the public service. So going forward, these are discussions that you can have with the Trade Union Council and solving some of the outdated problems, such as contract labor, such as low wages, that kind of thing. So I think it's a good conversation to have, not just about the 4%, but the future of the public service and how can we improve its efficiency and productivity.
Facebook, somebody on Facebook says you have been going around with a group of activists selling the way to change and a new Grenada which has great followers, especially online. Question: do you think the message of change is resonating with the young folks who are looking for an alternative with a young leader as them in a Redhead?
That's a tough question, but let me just say that the Youth for Change is a very active group, and we continue to expand. We continue to speak on behalf of the concerns in the country, and I believe right now that kind of grouping is necessary. It is not a political organization, and I hear the other part of the question to be something about a youthful leader, but you don't have to hold a position primarily to be a leader. A leader is someone who influences decisions and so on in various parts where they may be. And in my humble opinion, if it is that some members of the public might be thinking along that line, I don't necessarily share the view that I have to hold a position to determine whether or not people would follow or whether or not people would be influenced by what I say. I think by your fruits, what you do is most important. And again, how you do it, if you're communicating well with the country, they will follow you. But I think generally you don't have to, positions are very temporary, but influence, in my view, stays for a lifetime. And I think I will go with the latter. When my time reaches, whether or not I am interested to pursue any leadership position in the NBC or in the country, I would definitely make the public aware. And I wouldn't hide it and pretend and so on. I don't operate in that clandestine manner. I'm very straight up and frank. And right now, I don't want to make any such pronouncements, just to ensure that for the greater good and the bigger picture, everything stabilizes. And if I can contribute in the background, I am happy with that 100%. It doesn't matter to me where I stand or sit.
YouTube, somebody asks, would an NDC government keep the Imani program and police wardens if they form the next government?
Right. That is something that we get a lot in terms of a question. But how we have been responding to it is in this way. You cannot continue to leave young people on the waiting list and in temporary positions for the rest of their life and development. That is wrong. What we will seek to do, if a program has to be in terms of developing capacity and that sort of thing, it must be allowed to do so. The first thing we will do if we form the government is to audit that specific program, the Imani program, and work out ways in which we can bolster its effectiveness on the young population, whether it be for job and skills development, combining the National Training Agency programs, etc., funding it properly to bring it up to the standard that maybe it should be by now, and incorporating such a program with it. So removing it from under the auspices of politicians. We need to stop exploiting young people like that. So in my view, that is a program that has to be enhanced, but it must be looked at in the way, how does it contribute to the individual youth own development of their job readiness and the skills necessary to either start their own business or be employed, get their employability of that sort of thing. So how it is currently, that's just a bribe for vote kind of thing. People getting to stay on the program long so that they will remain to vote for the powers that be. That's nonsense, and we need to get rid of that mentality. Empower the young people in a genuine way.
Back to the phone line. Good morning, caller.
Yes, good morning, citizen Welsh. Greetings and greetings to your guests. Listen, can your guest hear me well? Can he confirm
Yes,
that?
I can. Yes, I can.
Very well. Listen, first let me congratulate you, pardon, as a young man and trying to get involved, and I say trying to quite purposefully, in politics in Grenada. The fact is that politics in Grenada cannot henceforth be the same as it used to. I hear you in your utterances, quote unquote, when we get into office. It seems to me that you people are principally and primarily seeking to get into office. But here's my concern. There is evidence out there sufficient, and by now you ought to have seen it, that this here country is operating on a constitution which has never been made into law. And therefore the validity, legitimacy, and legal authority of said document, which is in effect an imperial order in council of the Queen's Most Excellent Majesty, signed by Elizabeth Regina on the 19th of December 1973, and imposed in the most de facto way upon us henceforth, this document seems to mean nothing to you people. Therefore, I ask the question, do you people and the party that you represent hope to continue under the current constitutional architecture? Or do you propose to make some changes? I refer to modifying the Constitution and having it ratified by the people in popular referendum and enacted in the Parliament, a document made by the people of Grenada, or you propose to continue with the same old, same old? Thank you very much and have a nice day. Will you?
Thank you very much, Citizen Rollo.
I couldn't speak. Brother Rolo, thank you very much for the question. And I couldn't speak entirely to the NDC's final position on something like that, simply because I am not the professional to understand the constitutional ramifications. So I'm not going to go on a limb and give the NDC's final position. But what I would say is that, in my humble opinion, we need a brand new constitution altogether. How it must be derived must be through discussions, dialogue, participation. For example, NDC launched its internal constitutional review since 2018. I stand to be corrected, but around that year, and we are now in 2021, and it's still being passed around. It was through the diaspora, it was through other party members, and so on. Everyone had a say. You had an opportunity to give input. You had participation in the whole process. And ultimately, if not this upcoming convention, but in future, aspects of it will be adopted, and ultimately we'll incorporate a brand new constitution. So we are very familiar with the process of working towards modifying constitutions and ensuring that it is democratically done. As it relates to Grenada's constitution, I don't have the legal specifics And therefore, I would not venture to say that NDC would do X or Y. But what I would say is that a brand new constitution is something that I believe Grenadians can consider and might be even looking forward to. Because presently, if you ask any ordinary citizen what is in the constitution, just few can be able to tell you about it. So what you need now is some modifying or a total overhauling of the existing one. There are some areas that have to change. The only problem is you don't want, as Sister Jeremiah have said earlier on, where people with big influence and deep pockets would be able to sway certain things towards a particular direction. I know the trade unions, for example, will be very concerned if their constitutional right as public officers will be removed in terms of the right to get pension, that sort of thing. So any sort of reform where the constitution is concerned is a big task, Brother Rolo, and you continue to speak about it and NDC is listening.
Facebook question. Somebody on Facebook is asking, what are NDC's plans? Stop, lies. Will the NDC be revamping the policy document that clearly states their plans to include things that might have happened since it was presented 3 to 4 years ago?
Right. As it relates to the policy document, it is our platform, and we can stand by it in terms of what we see the future of Grenada to be, and will make changes where changes are necessary. As it relates to our policies on various issues, it is well documented. One thing I have learned, however, is that you can't have an opinion on everything. And therefore, in some cases, or if not all cases, you need concrete data to determine how you are going to move forward. And of course, the second part to it, you need the professionals who can help you to give the advice and so on necessary in terms of making a final decision. So every policy area under the existing policy document, from what I know, there is a policy committee, and that has been reviewed, and people are now understanding with some more clarity what we are going to do with X and Y. But in terms of making a final decision and pronouncement, we still lack a lot of data in Grenada to be able to say what we are going to do concretely. So it's a work in progress.
Let me go to WhatsApp. Somebody on WhatsApp is asking, most young folks don't know much about Morris Bishop, but heard of him and his achievements he made in 3.5 years, and they are seeing it in you based on the speeches made, giving them hope for the future. Can you tell us why you're taking that Morris Bishop approach to the way of change in Grenada, to the way of the change Grenada desperately needs at this time, and how you think the message has been selling?
Well, it's much easier to make a speech than it is to do work. And in activism today, it's a lot of work and resources required. So it gets awfully difficult sometimes for us to go about doing things. And by the grace of God and our own commitment to the struggle that we face, we want to see a lot of things changed, and we are not going to give up. So in terms of Morris, I like to stay away from that kind of thing about, trying to say this person is that. And so I think every individual is different. I grew up in a household where politics was the first and almost the only conversation on weekends and during the week that we would have. We would read newspapers, argue over articles, have dialogue. I would listen to my father explain geopolitical situations with his good friend, Brother G.P. Bowen, for years. And I myself would join in on the conversation when I can, etc. So this has been something that I've been following for a pretty long time. I do a lot of research, so I like to look back at the past to determine where we need to go in the future. I believe that there were certain aspects of revolution that was good, and also there were certain aspects that were poor, simply because it lacked the experience generally to understand that you can't imprison people for expressing their rights. And ultimately, you would have created a situation where all of that would have boiled up and so on. So I think there are lessons to be learned. And Grenada's development, we can't return to the era of communism. I'm not getting into ideology. I think that was a problem back then. And if we try to implement that kind of style now, it will be a problem. So I would promote the good aspects of it. And I think even Sir Eric Matthew Gary, he did some very good things during his tenure. And he also did some very naughty things that a lot of people would speak about and they would not be happy. But we must all take the good and leave the bad behind and move forward in that vein. So I think, I would really like to see more young people maybe getting involved in politics and activism and coming out and speak. I am certain that there are other people who are well qualified to give speeches as well, and we must look to invest in that area. So I'm not a one-man show, and I'm not too keen on promoting myself as Morris. No, not at all.
And the final question that we have time for comes from Facebook. Somebody asked... No, lies. We keep hearing that NDC is attacking the other side. My question is, what is the new approach to reducing the attacks that are being seen by the public, as well as how would NDC approach the issue to help educate the public that they would be seen as attacks?
Right. Well, if I would answer that question, I would say the fact that you keep hearing it, maybe it's not actually occurring, but you just keep hearing that more than what you hear. Because, look, the truth is, we cannot shy away from criticizing, commenting, or giving our own views on something that government has done. We are an opposition party, and that will forever be the rule once we hold the position of opposition. To the extent that we are elected as government, that will change. However, we can't shy away from that right now. Therefore, what you need is critique. What you need is compliments. What you need is other aspects of the conversations that can help people to decide on where we are at and how we can change things in Grenada. In my view, I do not believe that all NDC does is criticize. There are times when it can be annoying to the public in terms of criticizing a particular situation or issue, but generally the NDC tries its best to always lead and put forward suggestions, recommendations to our own detriment, because the government takes it and runs it off as its own ideas, and then the public covers in the doghouse. In my view, some people just want us to give the suggestions and solutions and let the NNP take it and try to implement it, make the mess, we critique, and then they come back and try to fix it, and it's about praise. But we don't have time for that. So we will criticize where it is necessary, but we must also compliment where it is also necessary. And I think that is the most responsible and balanced thing to do, given the situation where we are at with COVID-19 and other aspects of our economy and such.
I said that was the last question, but an interesting question on WhatsApp. Can the NDC promise us a reduction in VAT?
I couldn't speak to that. This will be something, if we form the government 13 months from now, I don't know what the economic situation would be like, and I couldn't speak to that. I would never venture to make such a promise. But what I would say is we need some level of stimulus and a reduction in other taxes, not just VAT, but other taxes. All of these things must be looked at. We need an overhaul in terms of a review, not only for our constitution, but we need a review of the tax regime that is presently in the country.
Ron, thank you very much for being our guest this morning. Always interesting speaking with you and hearing your thoughts on various issues. Appreciate it. As always, continue to stay safe.
You're most welcome. Thank you.
Have yourself a good one.
All right.
Deputy Public Relations Officer of the National Democratic Congress, Ron Redhead, our virtual guest this morning. We thank him so very much for being our guest. And thank you, viewers and listeners, for tuning in to the program. Always appreciate your time. It's time for me to head on out and make way for Joseph, who's up next with Mid-Morning Buzz. I'll be back tomorrow morning, God willing. Enjoy the rest of your terrific Tuesday.